thank you, Marianne, and honestly, Marianne mentioned it. Dr. Yang, Jianli has been very kind and gracious, speaking to every and all audiences we could put him in front of. Today we had him at the University of St. Thomas. Yesterday we had him at Texas A&M at the Bush School. He spoke in the Woodlands last night. He spoke to our own classes, the Institute classes on Tuesday night. But I'm really appreciative of it because you're an eyewitness and a participant in history. And I think we cover a lot of things with diplomats and secretary this and generals and national security advisors, but you're a person who's on the ground for these key moments, and your own true story is a reflection of where we are today. And I feel difficult putting you through it, but if you don't mind, if you can talk about your experiences and how it was you got to Tiananmen Square, and what you really saw, what you experienced, and for anyone who thinks it wasn't as bad as people say it was, or we should have let them off the hook. It was right to let them in the WTO, let them grow their economy, disregard human rights. The Chinese Communist Party was at a crossroads in 1989, and it absolutely chose a much more dire path than it could have taken. And sadly, we're taking a maybe even more dire path now under President Xi. But can you tell us, first of all, kind of through your own personal experiences in Tiananmen?
Thank you, Roman. I want to thank you again for bringing me here. I really enjoyed the trip here, and excited. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to have this conversation with you. And I want to thank Marianne for your kind introduction. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the entire World Affairs Council team for putting together this event and other events as well. Thank you so much. Yes, I came to United States. First came to United States in 1986 as a PhD student of mathematics at UC Berkeley. Before that, when I was in China, I was an up and coming young university teacher and young party official. I joined the Communist Party, the CCP, with the belief that young intellectuals like myself could change the party from within. We believed that it would be more effective than doing things from outside. And I tried, but soon I regret that decision, because even if you know China, in early 80s, people enjoy a larger degree of liberty, freedom, than the people of China have now. Still, the reality is the CCP is a dictatorship. Everything is restricted, and there is no true freedom of speech or any other freedoms, and human rights were not protected. But that time, everybody had hope, and everybody believed there's going to be a future, and tomorrow will be better. So that's the general sentiment among the people. But once you get into the system yourself, you will understand better. So, like myself. So I found, although I was promoted quickly, to the middle level of the party hierarchy, and I found my daily job as party official was watching and reporting on my fellow students and teachers, and watch what they say, what they think, and what they may do. So I organized the political studies on a weekly basis as required, and now three or four times in China political study each week, and at such meetings, students and teachers could say a lot of things. That time, again, some space to voice dissent and to say something interesting or sensitive. But everybody knew that, what they say could cause trouble. What they say could be used by the authority against them. Still, the reality is, it's a dictatorship. So I knew very well myself, I had to cover up. So I covered up to protect the students and teachers for a couple of years. But I knew deeply in my heart, sooner or later I will get into trouble. If I got found out, I'll be in trouble. And I want to quit. It's really against my belief, against my feeling, value or whatever. So I just want to quit. But it's impossible to quit the CCP. Now, they can expel you, but you cannot divorce them. And so the only way, probably the best way to quit the party is to leave the country. So I came here to sort of follow the fashion that just began in China to go abroad to receive a higher education. So actually it began with children of a high-ranking official family. But anyway, we are young intellectuals, everybody thought it's okay to go to abroad to receive a higher education. And I also left an impression to the authorities that I will go to US, receive education. After I got a degree, I would go back to serve in the government, okay? So I left China, came here, focus on my study, dreaming of becoming a mathematician. Actually, deeply in my heart, I really interested in politics. And when I was a teenager, I experienced a cultural revolution. The brutality in the 10 years of a disaster that's plunged millions of families into suffering. So I don't want to get into detail about that. So I already tried to help the peasants as a teenager with their uprising against government. So deeply in my heart, I really care for the future of China, and thought I would have chance to contribute to change China. But during my study years, I tried to focus myself on my study and try to forget about China politics especially. But when the student movement broke out in Tiananmen Square, my hope rekindled. So students demand the curb for government corruption, demand freedom, democracy, and more participation in the political policy decision-making process. All these things, it involves so many students. Almost every student participated, and also involves so many civilians and their parents. Everybody in China was sympathetic to the students and wish they would be able to achieve their goal. So suddenly I had hope again, and I began to organize the students in the United States to give a voice to our fellow students back in Beijing, and petition and protest in front of Chinese embassy's consulate, and followed the development in Tiananmen Square very closely. One night, I watched TV while eating dinner, and I watching a report by CBS by Dan Rather. Dan Rather went to Beijing to cover Gorbachev's visit. That visit was Soviet Union's leader's first visit in many decades. So many international journalists went to Beijing to cover that visit. Instead of covering Gorbachev's visit, most of them just went to Tiananmen Square to cover the demonstrations. So that day, the students start a hunger strike. That got even more involvement from ordinary people. And that day, one thing happened. It was reported by Dan Rather. He showed a picture, the TV, that armed police beating the student severely, very violent, and I saw blood running down their faces. So before that, both sides have been nonviolent. The government exercised a certain degree of restraint, but that day violence began. And students, of course, from day one to the end, were always nonviolent. And that moment, I decided to go back, and I felt no longer able to stay here to study without going back to be together with my fellow students at that moment. So I just arrived in Beijing the day after martial law was declared, and I joined the fellow student, old friends, teachers, and activists, including Liu Xiaobo, who would win the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010. He was a leading intellectual in Tiananmen Square. So we worked together, trying.
I might note, because he was in prison, you accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on his behalf.
Yes.
Later.
Yes. We worked together for strategies, try to figure out what's the way to continue, how we can achieve a goal. And at that time, some students had already left Tiananmen Square back to school, but they believe this time to go back and wait for another opportunity to give another push. And most students actually stayed in Tiananmen Square waiting for People's National Congress to convene so that we can petition to the Congress. So we still have a hope, some trust in the government system. And to continue to mobilize into, especially university teachers to join, Liu Xiaobo started a hunger strike on June 2nd. And we all helped him. And on the night of June 3rd, the government made a second attempt to send troops to the city. A few weeks before, they made a failed attempt to send troops. But now they try to send troops into the city again. Now we all mobilized. They try to block military vehicles from entering the city. Worked here or there, naively believing that we could do it. We can, just block them away. That night, June 3rd night, the loudspeakers began making announcements, something like, counter-revolutionary riots are happening in Beijing. Everyone is required to return home. Anybody who does not return home will bear consequences yourself. Something sounds very serious. And we thought it's a threat, because lot of threat already. Another threat may not sound credible. So, but we know the climate become tense. But we continue in Tiananmen Square, try to figure out what next step we'll take. That night I got really tired. I went back to campus to take a shower. And after shower, I got on the back of a bike with another friend. We tried to go back to Tiananmen Square. Just a few minutes after we left the campus, we heard the first gunshot. The massacre began. And we sped up to get to the Chang'an Avenue, which is a major avenue that crosses Tiananmen Square. large avenue. So we got to the avenue, we saw troops move slowly toward Tiananmen Square. As they move, they open fires to the crowd. At first, we couldn't believe that's real. It's unreal. You know, there had not been a moment that we could believe they would open fire to us. But when we carried, the wounded body are already dead, those students back, we saw it's real. We got really furious, and we tried to do something without knowing what to do. And we just try to get close to the troops. They move, keep moving, we try to close. When they open fire, we just went down to the ground to avoid a bullet. Then carry those wounded or already, dead to the back. There's one moment, light on, and troops stopped moving. We can get very, very close. I got so close I could talk directly up to the soldiers in the military vehicle. And we try to convince them that it's not right thing to kill people, and also they did not know what's going on in Beijing. And they remained motionless, no matter what we said. And we began singing the songs that every Chinese knows, hoping to touch their heart, to stop killing. But they continue to remain motionless. Once they receive an order, they just open fires. The one the nearest one got killed just 3 feet away from me. Then we just carry all the bodies to the back. They're back and forth for 7 or 8 hours. So I saw a few dozen people killed in that way. Then that morning, at the dawn of June 4th, I managed to move to the south side of Tiananmen Square, where I met a group of students, about 400 of them, led by Liu Xiaobo. They were the group that last retreated, and the Tiananmen Square was taken over by troops. Then they left, and I joined them, and moving slowly, trying to go back to school, our universities. We have to cross the Chang'an Avenue again, because our campus, most campus are on the northwest side, so we have to cross. When the student got on the Chang'an Avenue again, I almost got on and looked at the right-hand side. There were 4 tanks from Tiananmen Square running at very high speed toward us. The first one just threw tear gas to the crowd. The second one opened machine guns to either side, to both sides. And the third and the fourth just chased the student. And the student tried to escape for life. Those who did not escape soon enough got run over. There was a moment of silence, then screaming. Everybody screamed. Then we just went to the middle street, trying to collect the bodies, bloody, flat. And a friend just lost 2 legs, still alive. Try to get them to hospital. Sorry.
And if you need
Yeah.
a moment, for you all to know,
Yeah.
you had already thought about committing yourself to doing what you could for the Chinese people for the ordinary citizens of your country and doing something to change it, you initially thought from within as a party member, then you thought it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Tiananmen Square was horrific, but this, I think you've told me, was the absolute turning point in your entire life. And
Yeah.
then you can say, from this point forward, Jianli has dedicated the past 30 years to human rights and doing everything he can for human rights and just humanity and decency for the ordinary Chinese people. And maybe you could just tell how that moment you were able to escape China,
Yeah.
and maybe we take it from there.
Yeah, it's a very important moment. Thank you for helping me. Sure. At that moment, I was determined to give up my mathematical career and to try to do everything possible to help change China and to prevent such tragedy from happening again in China. So that's my determination for the rest of my life. Then we moved back to school, trying to do something without knowing what to do. And the professors came to us and told us, the only thing you guys can do is to run away. Just run as far as you can. And a professor specifically told me, so you don't have to worry about the mathematical career. Just follow your heart. Whatever you want to do, just go to do it. Then we say goodbye to each other, and we all went separate way. And I managed to hide in the countryside for 2 days before I got to Beijing International Airport. I was luckier than most students because I had a passport, which was a privilege back then to most ordinary Chinese people. And I had a visa, US visa, and I could leave China that moment. So there was a chaos in the international airport because the police officers also complained about Kennedy, and they let people go. So I left Beijing without any incident, and the plane took off. The plane landed in Shanghai to take more passengers, and it took off again. When the plane took off, every passenger clapped their hand. They were happy. They made it. They could leave China at that moment, except me. I was crying. I produced out a black band and wear on my left arm to mourn those who had just fallen in Tiananmen Square, and crying, thinking of what we should do, and thinking when I will be able to return home.
And I'll just you 13, 14 hours later, you landed in San Francisco.
San Francisco,
Obviously, a lot of people on that plane were students trying to escape, and they knew, even in the United States, there could be people reporting back to the party that they were there. Most people, when they got off the plane, they got out of the airport as quickly and easy as they could, but you very courageously stood up. There were dozens of reporters at the airport because people knew this was the first plane out of China since Tiananmen Square. And instead of quietly going about your life, you, knowing the risk, went and talked to the reporters at the airport.
Yeah, thank you for helping me. Thank you. So then I began my activism in the United States, and as I continue my education.
You wouldn't be surprised, but it was only weeks after that you testified before Congress. He founded his own initiative for human rights in China. For the next 13 years, you're one of the most prominent activists traveling around the world on behalf of Chinese human rights. And can you talk about knowing the enormous risk you were facing why it was in 2002 that you felt it was, despite the risk, imperative that you go back to China.
Yeah. As Roland said, after I returned, I have been actively work for try to advance human rights and democracy in China. I spoke at Congress and university and around the world, helped found pro-democracy organizations, and organized interfaith leadership conference, bring all the younger generation leaders from various ethnic, religious, and regional groups. So I launched online publication, whatever we can do to try to help empower the people back in China. So I got my degree from Berkeley and taught mathematics. I went on to become a student again at Harvard. And I got my PhD. I don't know how I got it, but I spent more time on activism than study. But I managed to go through that. And I stayed in Harvard for 1 year as research fellow. And by that time, in the eyes of the CCP, I had turned from party official to a traitor. So I was deemed a traitor by the CCP. But that year, in 2002, a labor movement broke out across China, especially in the north and east part of China, where China's heavy industry was based. A lot of layout workers took to street protesting against government policy. I received a phone call from one of the labor leaders asking me to help them with strategies. Then I helped them with nonviolent resistance strategies. I'm a believer in nonviolence. And then I thought to myself, this is a moment. This should be a moment for me to go back. 13 years already, 13 years after I returned, there's separation between inside and outside. That time there was no advanced internet, the communication itself was a problem. And it's a time for democracy activists like myself to integrate with grassroots activists. So I decided to go back. But I was banned from entering China as a traitor, and my passport expired, and I tried to get it renewed, only get rejected. So the only way to return, to enter China, not only way, there are a lot of ways, but I chose my own way. That is, I borrowed a passport from a friend, and I bought a fake ID, and went back to China. So I entered China smoothly, without any incident. So there was no biometric test check that time, as every airport does now. I just bet nobody would think I would try to go back China in that way. So I entered. I worked in Beijing with the construction workers, document their grievances, and try to find a way to help them, how to get their grievances addressed. Then I went to northern part of China, where I joined the leaders of the labor movement, and help them with the non-violent resistance strategies, and all these things for 2 weeks. As originally planned, I should leave China by that time, so I managed to get to Kunming, That is the capital city of Yunnan province. It's bordered with Burma. And my original plan is get to the border, and a few Christians would help me cross the border and cross another border to Thailand, then to Bangkok, where a former acting prime minister would help me clear an illegal entry problem. Then I would return to the United States. Then mobilize more people to go back again. That's my dream. So, but at Kunming, when I tried to get on plane, my fake ID was spotted because that is the golden triangle for drug traffickers. So the security personnel are better trained than any other part of China. So my fake ID was spotted. A few minutes later, I found myself in the hands of the security personnel. Soon they found out my identity, that I was arrested. So 12 days later, they transferred me to Beijing. So in Kunming had never caught a fish like myself. So they treat me with respect. They carry luggage everywhere, did not handcuff me with great respect. And they escorted me to Beijing, 3 police officers. And when we walked down the stairway from the plane, I was at ease. I thought Beijing would be same as Kunming, but I forgot. Beijing is the place where Mao Zedong's wife was detained. Serious. So a lot of big fishes there. And so the Kunming police officer still carry my luggage bag. And I tried to talk to Beijing police officer. They shot at me. Don't talk. Okay, they grabbed me, literally grabbed me and pushed me in the car. And 2 officers entered from either side. The one police officer sitting in the passenger side turned back, handcuffed. First time, got handcuffed. And the 2 police officers blindfolded me. So I feared. First time I feel, afraid, and shivers was sent to every cell. And I couldn't help but think the worst. I thought they would take me to a place where nobody knows where it will be and shoot me. That's it.
Yes.
Or put me somewhere nobody knows where it is, and for the rest of my life. So I kept thinking of this worst scenario, and the car began moving around, and I continued to fear, almost collapse, and I began to pray. I prayed to God. I said to God, I'm afraid. So I don't know why these things can happen to me, but I want a message from you. If this is part of your purpose, if your purpose on me, if it's part of your plan for me, if I receive that message, I'll be happily accept what happened to me. I kept praying, and I said to God, be with me. No matter what happens, be with me. So my fear gradually left. And at the end of the ride, I was put into a prison where I don't know what it is. Later I found it was exactly the prison where Mao's wife was detained. And they put me in the cell, concrete, 1 mattress. That began my solitary confinement. And I have no idea how long I would be in that situation. I thought it would be in that situation for the rest of my life. You know, I, again, couldn't help but think the worst. My family had already abandoned me. My friends have already forgotten about me. And what we should do this, and a lot of worries, anxieties, regrets, almost collapsed. So I prayed. I resort to prayer to sustain. I prayed on an hourly basis. And one day, I tried to remember some complicated English words, but I found I couldn't. That worries me so much. And I said to myself, I have to do something, to prevent my memory from being lost. And I have to do something about it. So I began writing poems in my head. And I wrote...
Just so people know, there was nothing else allowed in the room.
No, nothing.
Yes.
And no paper, no pen, no outside news, nobody talked to except interrogators. Nothing at all. No books to read. So I have to write poems in my head. So I remember every word I wrote, I put there. So the exercise I did, I enjoy it very much. Every night, I, just lie down on my back, on the board. There's no bed, and gaze at ceiling, and I could see the structure of the poems. I switch stanzas and try to find a word to replace a word that I was not satisfied with. And I had such a faith as I have a faith in God. When I search, I will find you. And when I try to search a word, I have a faith, I will find you. So that kind of exercises. So that kept me from becoming insane and sustained me. And I also challenged myself because there are a lot of regret. Why I should have done the things I did is worth doing. So I have to find an answer to the why question. Why I should, be the person like Messiah. Why should I do this? And there's some doubts, suspicion going on. And I try to assure myself by a thought experiment. So I repeated a thought experiment in my mind. So I imagine I take a universal declaration of human rights and go back to China and randomly meet the people on the streets and ask them a question whether, in their language they can understand, whether they want to have the rights described in this document, or do you want to enjoy this right? Do you want to have freedom, all the things? And I try to think what the people would respond to this question. So do anybody think you would meet anybody who would say, no, I would not want to enjoy this freedom, this right? So no. So that assured me everybody desires for freedom. Desire for freedom is universal. It's intrinsic. You just cannot take it away from a human being. So I was assured. Yeah. So this is the things I did in solitary confinement. And one day, police came.
And this is almost a year and a half later.
15 months later. A police officer came. There's a double door It's a thick wood door and a metal door. And they open. I thought it's just another interrogation. More than hundreds already. And they took me to a different room this time, where this great glass wall, and in the middle there is a window. On the other side of the wall, standing a gentleman. He was my lawyer, hired by my family, but had been forbidden by the Chinese government to come to see me for 15 months. So he told me, most important message he told me was, I was not alone. So there was a outpouring support in the United States and other countries. The U.S. Congress, both chambers passed the resolutions demanding my immediate unconditional release. And many congressional members worked hard for my freedom. So many other good people in this country worked hard for my freedom. Only with that pressure did the Chinese government allow my lawyer to have that visit. And that ended my solitary confinement.
It didn't end your time in prison, and I'll use the audience questions to kind of get to where we are in China today.
Yeah.
But just, Jianli, you're a beautiful human being. Your humanity, your just decency is really inspiring. We only have a few copies of this book left because we sold a lot of them in the Woodlands and other places. But Jianli opens the book dedicated to two people: Tank Man, who a lot of people are familiar with, the courageous person who stood in front of the tank and just non-violently stepping back and forth, knowing what had happened with other students and young people who sadly had been shot and run over before that. But your deep sense of humanity and decency, you say there are two tank men, because we don't think about the person driving that tank who refused the orders and did not continue, did not kill him. Maybe just to kind of your personal story, to end it on a bit of a high note, can you talk about how and where you saw a kind of spread humanity within prison itself? And maybe you told me one of your highlights of your entire life was being able to help baptize 3 people in prison.
Yes. So as a person, I think the best of me as a person was when I was in prison. And I tried to be a good man, tried to be a good Christian, tried to be strong. And I transferred from different prisons. Whenever I got a new prison, I would examine the environment, trying to figure out who the jailer I should try to win over. And at each prison I stayed, I got a jailer friend, and they helped me to get my poems out, my letters out, and my writings out, and also I got a Bible, because I carried the Bible back to China, but it's separate with me once I got arrested, but it's put somewhere in prison. So the jailer helped me to get a Bible. Then I organized the Bible study in prison, and I helped baptize 3 inmates through that Bible study. Yeah.
And just a follow-up from that, Archie asks, and one of great teachers, thank you, Archie Buckman, he's here from Lucerne South Academy. Can you tell us what happened to the young man that stood in front of the tank?
The tank man is a symbol. It's symbol for many things. You all understand. I don't want to get into it. So we have no idea what happened to him, because the Chinese government have been making the best effort to control the information about the incident, about anything. So as a result, the younger generation in China have no idea what's going on, what happened in the such recent history of China. So we don't know. We don't know where he is. We don't know the other tanker man, what happened to the other tanker man, the tanker driver who refused to kill. We don't know what happened to him either.
And just to kind of bring it up to today, like I said, even when you were released in 2007, you've kept fighting. You've kept on the international stage, the U.S. Congress, the United Nations, countries all around the world, knowing the risks that you face. Some people, somebody asked, what were the potential repercussions for your family?
Yeah. When I talked to the journalist in San Francisco International Airport, when I just got out of the plane, and when I testified in the Congress, I had no moment thinking about my family. I feel really guilty. Then and today, I have felt guilty for my family. Of course, we got in trouble, and we got harassment, constant harassment, and in the very sensitive time, they are under city arrest, meaning without permission, they will not go out the city. And for quite a long time, my father and mother were banned from leaving China for almost 10 years. And when I was in prison, my family got affected too. So they suffered even more than I suffered in prison. So as a dissident, after I was released from prison, I spent a lot of time with Liu Xiaobo. Then we talked so much about family. We all agreed that the people we owe most are our families. And they suffer not because the choice they made, it's because the choice we made. So every family members of the dissident suffered to a certain degree. Then, today, and continue.
And I might just maybe follow up on it. You mentioned Congress petition on your behalf, President Bush 3 different times reaching out to China on your behalf. You could have maybe been released from prison about a year earlier, but you had 2 requests. But one, I think most personal, most meaningful, was you asked for permission to visit your father's grave and sweep McLean's grave, but that was denied.
Yeah. U.S. Just made tremendous effort for my freedom. President Bush, George W. Bush, raised my case 3 times to his Chinese counterpart. So did Secretary Colin Powell, and so did his successor, Condoleezza Rice. And this morning, I just had a meeting with a business friend. He was in prison that time for, there's overlap. And all we remember, U.S. Ambassador Rand, he raised my case more than 60 times to the Chinese authorities. With that effort, I was sentenced to 5 years, which came as a surprise to everybody. It's a so light sentence. And with U.S. pressure, Chinese government agreed to release me about a year before my sentence ended. And it took me to an international airport, and I said, I want to have a negotiation. Why negotiation? Just get on plane, go back to U.S. Have you reunion with your family? So, and they put me in the 5-star hotel room that is president of airline company's hotel room or the open refrigerator, say you can take whatever, eat, in prison, the food is very bad. That kind of temptation, and I said, I'm serious. I want to have a negotiation. I said, what? I say, number one, I'm a Chinese citizen. I have every right to return. You have to acknowledge that. Yeah. One of my crime was illegal entry. Yes, it is illegal entry. Other person's passport, entry, fake ID. But anyway, I want them to acknowledge that I'm a Chinese citizen. I have a right to return. In writing, they refused to do that. But first, the secretary of U.S. Embassy was waiting to take me back to U.S. I said, get him here. You said this in the presence of U.S. First Secretary, as evidence. Okay. They refused to do that. And I said, I don't want to leave China now. I have to visit my father's grave, who passed away while I was in prison. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral, and all the things. And also they want me to sign a confession. I said no. I want a passport. They refused to give me. So they just change hand, from Chinese official to U.S. official. They get on plane. The poor passengers waited for 4 hours without knowing what happened. Yeah. Oh yeah. And in the end, I said, you cannot force me to leave China. If I choose to leave China, I choose to leave China. I want to be a free man. Of course, I want to free man in my country. Then they said no. So, of course, I got no right. I was put back in the prison. I served my sentence for another year. And the good news, I got McDonald's that day. The police officers thought this guy, is something. We really respect him. Yeah, we should treat him. Yeah, gave him a McDonald's.
It's such an incredible story. We'll just only really have time for just a handful of audience questions. But just to bring it up to today, to connect with a lot of people asking about, maybe if you can kind of combine your overall impressions. Sadly, I know they're kind of dire for where the Communist Party is now, especially under President Xi. Jimmy asked, what do you think of the current leader of China, President Xi? Linda asks, what's your opinion about the influence and control of social media, cyber warfare, surveillance by the CCP? And can you just give your impression of where we are today?
Yes. Even in the most difficult time of mine, for example, when I saw tanks running over students or in solitary confinement, I would never think China would become what it is today. Under Xi, China has gone backward across board. Especially human rights violation reached historical high. And we all made mistakes. We, as dissident people and the international community, America. So I probably do not have time to get into it, but it's really difficult. China, when before Xi Jinping, we had a very small space of the civil society. We tried to expand it. Actually, everybody thought we would gradually expand that space to build a civil society as the base, as peaceful transition to democracy. But now, that space is zero. So it's almost difficult, almost impossible to engage directly with the people in China in any discussion, let alone actions about human rights defending or transition to democracy and possible. So I don't want to reflect on the mistakes we all made in the past 3 decades. What I want to emphasize is that last year's White Paper movement, that's nationwide protest against COVID policy, and actually forced the government's hand to change the policy, which was great success. This is the first nationwide protest since Tiananmen Square movement. They give us a lot of hope. Number one, for many, many years, many people believed Chinese people stopped demanding freedom and democracy. But this movement just proved otherwise. And then number two, the leaders are young people. They are so young, brave, and wise. And after that movement, the fear the people have of Xi Jinping the regime actually reduced. The authority has, his authority actually has undermined. So in China, more and more people, more protests are taking place. So, number one. Number two, the entire international community has already awakened to the reality. They made mistakes, now they awaken to the reality that, only trade with China alone cannot change China. We have to do something else. We have to engage with China with principle and many, many other things. And also, another good news I want to emphasize is thanks to Xi Jinping's policy, private entrepreneurs in China are turning their back on the regime. They all lost trust in this regime, especially in Xi. And many of them just coming out of China or try to do something inside China. Just this morning, I met one private entrepreneurs. We talked about the topic. And elite now lost trust with Xi Jinping. So I do think there's new dynamics. There is hope that we can, continue to engage with China with the principle to produce an politically independent middle class, to gradually form viable democratic opposition. So it may take a long time, it may take a few years, even possible a few decades. But remember, desire for freedom is universal. So we are going to there. We will arrive there.
And I'll just kind of, if you don't mind, just kind of do 2 questions quickly because we're a bit over time. The biggest human rights kind of catastrophe the last number of years in China, the Uyghurs. You have a good question here from Ali. And as you noted, you were one of the first people to start interfaith dialogue between the Chinese diaspora. Ali asks, with the ongoing genocide of the Uyghurs in China, what should the European governments in the United States be doing?
They have been doing something, but it's not enough. So we, international community, first have to realize the reality. This is a 21st century concentration camp, and even to the level of genocide. This is not acceptable. So I urge every world leaders, when meet with the Chinese government, must raise this issue to tell them this is not acceptable. And also try to sanction those individual officials who are responsible for the human rights violations. We thank the country, but every official would say, oh no, yes, they don't feel the pain. We should let the individual perpetrators feel the pain. There are a lot of ways. So it's just a matter of our political will. So if we should have that political will to do it, it's definitely make clear message to the world, to Chinese government, to the people of China, to Uyghurs. This should stop.
You touched upon it just now and earlier, but these are three good questions, I think, to leave us in terms of what we as Americans and the American government can be doing, and your overall impressions of where things are going from here. I'll put them all together, and if you can kind of give a concluding answer. Chase asks, what would be the best approach of the U.S. government to take from here? Raphael asks, somewhat related to that, what is the most important thing Americans can learn from your dissident experience? And more broadly, Scott asks, what will it take to have an open system in China?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's a big question.
Yeah. Sorry, it's...
But anyway, I know I try to answer in this way. I want to tell you another true story. And it happened in my prison. A young man of 20-year-old age was sentenced to death. His crime was stealing 2 or 3 motorcycles. And he got death penalty. The day, he was kept in the death row cell with other inmates also, received death penalty, sentenced to death. The night before he was taken to execution, he said to his inmate, he said, I'm not sure if there's going to be next life. If there's going to be next life, I want to make sure whether I want to be born again. I will refuse to be born again if I see China flag. I only agree to be born again if I see stars and stripes. This is a true story. What I want to say is, I just cannot overestimate the importance of American democracy to the people around the world, especially the oppressed people. And they're looking up to this country as a beacon of hope. For all its mistakes, my own example testify this is the greatest country on earth. The people are the greatest. But if you ask me what Americans can do for us, I would say make American democracy great again. Mega. Make American democracy great again. Because for a lot of things happening in this country, honestly, Americans' democracy has lost some appealing to my people, which is dangerous. So we have to keep the hope of the people alive. So do everything in this country to make American democracy great again, America. Then we should have a right China policy. Bring all democracy together to engage with China with the principle. So I don't have time to go to details. I can talk about this topic for many days. But, I just,
Basically, you're calling for an alliance of democracies.
Alliance of democracy
get our own...
Build economically strong. The economy is so important. So China has been used newly found power, the economic power, to throw weight around. We have to defend our value because China made an inroad in our country already. in democracies already, in our universities, in every walks of life. So we have to defend our value, and also to help the people live like themselves until everybody is free in the world. There are going to be trouble. Sooner or later, there are going to be trouble. So, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. So we have to do things to protect it and help people to gain it.
And like you were saying, it starts at home. It starts without extreme partisan politics. It starts without the left attacking the right and the right attacking the left, and trying to think the bigger, broader picture. Our democracy is important.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, Dr. Yang, it's a true privilege and honor to host you, and we all wish you all the best. We have a few copies of the books left. This is a collection of his incredible speeches all around the world, like I mentioned, to the United Nations and Congress or else. I'm working on you to write your own story, your own personal story. Maybe we'll have you back at that point. But if you all join me in thanking Dr. Jianli Yang.